You may be seated. So good to see all of you out here this morning. We are, if this is your first time back to Curtis Lake in a long time, we are working our way through some amazing literature that comes out of the Bible called the Book of Proverbs. And throughout this time, we are looking at what it means to live wisely. Does anybody feel like you've grown a little more wise over the last few weeks? No, we're not doing a good enough job with that. Is it just that wisdom is so hard to actually employ in our lives because of sometimes the sacrifices that are required to make that happen? I don't know, but we're going to continue on doing it anyway. Is that okay? All right. That feels like a real rousing approval. So that's good. Today I want to talk about a topic that might be a little surprising. In fact, I think if I gave you all 1,000 opportunities to guess on what we talk about, you'd never get it. I have never preached a message on this particular subject in many, many years, but I want to talk to you about saving money. Is that funny? It's a little funny, but yeah, we're going to talk about saving money. I know maybe it sounds a little strange because the church is supposed to talk about giving money, right? Like we're supposed to be giving, we're supposed to be generous. Like what is this saving business? But I want to look at saving as a part of the overall discipline of being stewards. Stewardship is a term we often use in church setting to refer to what it means that we are accountable to God for all of our stuff. We are accountable to God for our money. We are accountable to God for our lives. We are accountable to God for all our possessions. Everything that really comes within the domain of our control, we actually, those of us who are followers of Jesus, we believe that we answer to God for all of those things. And so our money is a really, really big part of that overall scheme of stewardship. And one of the things that I think is often neglected, and something maybe we don't quite talk enough about, is saving our money. Now, again, I think the talk about giving and generosity and all that stuff is really wonderful and great, but I think we're going to see here, as we work through the message this morning, that saving is a really, really important function of our overall financial well-being. And who wouldn't want to be more healthy financially? Anybody out there? All right. So today we're going to talk about a penny saved and the responsibility of saving money as a part of our stewardship. So if you have your Bibles, turn to Proverbs chapter 13, verse 11. I'm just going to read one simple proverb here, and then we're going to look at some other scriptures as well as we work our way through this topic. Proverbs 13:11 says this: "Wealth gained hastily will dwindle, but whoever gathers little by little will increase it." That is, will increase their wealth. Again, let me read it. "Wealth gained hastily will dwindle, but whoever gathers little by little will increase it." So there is put forth here a wise saying, a proverb, a recommendation for one aspect of how we manage our money, and that is that it is incumbent upon us to preserve, right, or here the language used is gathered, little by little over a period of time in order that our wealth might increase. So the contrast here is distinctly made between gathering hastily, right, or in a relatively short time frame, or perhaps with relative ease. Some Bible translators look at the shade of meaning with hastily here and think it to mean money that is gained through fraudulent activity or by taking advantage of other people or another person, right? It says money gained in those ways. Money gained quickly has a tendency to diminish quickly, but money gained over time will increase wealth. There's an article written last May 31st, 2020, about Allen Iverson. Maybe you remember him. He was this very, very elite basketball player. He, in his course of his career, made $200 million in his NBA contracts. And then on top of that, had all kinds of sponsorships and millions of other dollars that were made from companies that he represented. Well, last year, there was a court judgment placed on him where he was fined $860,000 that he had to pay back to some jeweler. I don't know what that story is all about. I'm sure there's a really interesting story that goes along with that. But the point is, Allen Iverson was unable to pay back that money because he was dead broke. Some guy that had made hundreds of millions of dollars found himself with nothing. And the bank actually seized his bank account so that when some rainy day trust fund eventually kicked in, something that he had set up some years before, then the compensation would be able to be paid back. Marion Jones, how many remember the gold medalist Marion Jones, right? Real popular athlete. She was making $7 million a year, won 3 gold medals, was ultimately indicted on check fraud, of all things, and IRS forgery charges. She spent 6 months in jail, lost her gold medals, right? And who knows where she is now. Statistics reveal that 78% of people who play in the NFL, the National Football League, after just 2 years of retirement, declare bankruptcy. For the NBA, there's an average of 60% of NBA players, again, people making minimally hundreds of thousands of dollars, but probably more likely millions of dollars, 60% of them after 5 years of retirement declaring bankruptcy. What happens to all of this money? Well, this proverb we looked at reveals some insight that money gained hastily, money gained quickly, has a tendency to diminish quickly. Why? Well, in many of these cases, because people made really, really bad decisions during the time in which they were working. This very small time frame where they were earning such incredible amounts of money, they lived as if they were always going to continue making that kind of money. And now they find themselves really just several years later with absolutely nothing. And so we understand from that it isn't about trying to absolutely maximize our earning potential. And that the secret to saving and the secret to success in that regard is, well, you got to make a lot of money. Because how many of you know it takes a lot of money to live? Right? Like, it's obnoxious, isn't it? Just how much money it takes to live like an ordinary, normal human being. And so you think, man, I got to make so much money in order to actually have enough left over to save for the future. But let's not fool ourselves into thinking that saving, preserving is just for those who make lots and lots of money. It really is for everybody. The secret really is that we have to manage money with forethought and with planning. Because the reality is that managing money thoughtlessly will ultimately leave nothing for the future. Like, if we just manage our money without really thinking about the future, we're going to get exactly what we planned for. And that is nothing for the future. We recognize in the United States especially, we generally speaking have a big savings problem. We hear it all the time on the news. Americans don't save enough. They're not saving enough for the realities of today. Right? Few people have enough money to deal with the emergencies that just naturally crop up. Right? Something goes bad in the house that you got to replace, or something gets broken on the car. All of a sudden, you got some mechanic bill that costs $1,000, and you're like, well, where am I going to get $1,000? For some people, that is an immense crisis. It is crippling. For other people who've planned for it, it's like, well, that's annoying, because, I mean, who wants to just lose $1,000 or sink $1,000 into the car? None of us wants to do that. But for some people who've planned for it, it's just really obnoxious, but no big deal. They're able to do it and just move on. But for other people, it's absolutely crippling because they haven't planned for it. Now, in the world, with regard to saving, conventional wisdom would have us believe that the more we save, the better off we'll be. Right? Like, if you were to ask the world's financial advisors, well, then how much money should I save? There may be some guidance on exactly what you'll need. You can go online and you can look at retirement calculators, right, where you plug in, here's what I have, here's what I make, here's what I need, here's how old I am, here's how old I want to be when I retire. You plug in all that stuff and it comes up with this magic number that says, here's how much money you need to save for the rest of your life, you know, and given that all the right conditions exist, this is what you can expect to have at the end, right? So there's some general guidance when it comes to those things, but the prevailing notion would be this. If you were to ask the financial advisors in the world, how much should I save? You know what they would say? They'd say, as much as you can. Like, there's no cap, there's no limit, there's no number that gets you beyond where you ought to be. Why? Because as far as the world is concerned, there is a host of potential problems and difficulties down the road for us. I mean, maybe you won't be able to earn money for as long as you thought you'd be able to earn money for, and you'll have to retire early, or at least take a lower amount of pay year by year because you can't quite keep up with the schedule that you had before, right? And so now all of a sudden that plan's a little off. Or maybe your health is going to fail. To a degree that's actually detrimental to your being able to work. Maybe you can't work at all. And maybe it's so debilitating that it creates a series of medical bills that you weren't expecting, right? I mean, there's all kinds of things that can happen down the road in the future. And the world's financial advisors would say, listen, you just can't be too careful. So save as much as you can. And we all know that we should, right? We all know that we should save, and most of us know that probably if we are saving, we should do even a little better than we actually are. But for those of us that are doing it, for those of you out there maybe that you feel like you are saving, you are living with some planning, my question for you, my challenge for you would be this. Are you doing it for the right reason? Are you doing it for the right reasons? Because, again, I point out what the world's financial advisors would say to caution us, those of us that are trying to live lives that glorify and honor God, that maybe there is a different way to look at it. That it isn't just, preserve and save and keep and if I dare say, hoard as much as you possibly can so that you are as insulated from potential difficulties down the road as you possibly can be. So the question we have to ask ourselves in managing our money responsibly is, are we doing it for the right reasons? Why? Well, because for the Christian, we understand we live under some different kingdom principles. One of them is this, that we trust God every day. Right? We trust God every day. That's one of the kingdom principles that we're supposed to live by. We trust God for today's bread. Right? What did Jesus say in his prayer? He said, Father, give us this day what? Our daily bread. Right? Jesus had this perspective that we look to God for our continued daily sustenance. And we understand that to follow God means to trust God to some degree. There's also the balance that we have to kind of strike of, well, what am I supposed to keep for myself and what am I supposed to use in my generosity toward other people? That's a really difficult question to answer, isn't it? Like people could come up and say, well, how much should I save for myself? How much should I be giving, right? Because we all bump up against that. Like if you're paying attention, we're all going to bump up against it. You're going to watch TV sometime, and all of a sudden, the TV show's going to break, and a commercial's going to come on, and it's going to show you some scene of just tremendous poverty happening in some other part of the world, right? As an outreach to the people watching to give toward this problem that's happening overseas. When we do global outreach week or month or day or whatever global outreach emphasis we might be doing around here, where we're trying to remind people of the realities of others who are indeed less fortunate than we are, it is done with the intent of just helping us to remember, hey, listen, everything we have, that is not for our own consumption. There is a responsibility that we have to other people in the world, and we want to continue to raise our awareness of those things. And so a lot of people, they will respond to those. How many of you have been on a missions trip? Like you've been to some part of the world where you saw like real poverty, and it changed no matter where you are on the financial spectrum, right? Whether you feel like you are just making it from paycheck to paycheck or you feel like you're doing pretty well, you went and you saw people living in real poverty, people that didn't have homes. They were just taking junk and trash and fitting it together to try to provide some shelter from the elements. They were going without food every single day. They were just living in literal abject poverty. And you look at that and you think, man, I have so much. And maybe your perspective changes on your own things, at least, for a little while until you forget again. All right? So we wrestle with that tension. We wrestle with that balance of, what does it mean for me to practice financial responsibility for me and my household while at the same time living with a kingdom-minded mindset where I want to honor and glorify God through my generosity? And so we come to this question. Does money or saving money honor God? Does saving money actually honor God? Is that something we are supposed to do as followers of Jesus? And here's why we wrestle with that. Because we read through the Gospels and we come across certain things that would suggest perhaps we should think through otherwise. Like, for instance, Jesus told this parable about the guy with the barns. Remember the guy with the barns? He had these barns, and he had this great harvest one year, and he filled the barns, and he still had so much more. And so he decided he was going to tear down those barns because they weren't big enough to hold all his junk, to hold all his stuff, right? All the stuff that he wanted to keep for himself. And he built bigger barns. And Jesus called him a fool. And then there was the woman who gave unlike anybody else gave, right? That scene where Jesus was at the temple and everybody was making this grand show and a grand gesture of their giving, throwing their offerings into the offertory, right? Presenting their offerings before God, making sure that the people on the left and the right were paying attention to just how much they were giving and how loud a sound their offering made when it hit the coffers. And then strolls in this widow woman, and she places in her last 2 coins. And Jesus says she has given more than anybody because they have given out of their abundance, and she has given out of her need. What are we supposed to do with that? The rich young ruler that came to Jesus said, "What should I do to inherit eternal life?" And Jesus said to him, "Sell everything you have, give the money to the poor, and come and follow me." And the Bible says he went away from Jesus sad because he had great possessions. He wasn't willing to surrender those things and to do the thing that Jesus had called him to do. What are we supposed to do with that? And then finally, Jesus himself says these words to those who would follow him. He says, "Don't worry about tomorrow. Don't worry about what you will eat. Don't worry about what you will drink. Don't worry about what you'll wear." Right? Tomorrow has enough of its own problems to deal with, right? Like we got to deal with today's stuff. And Jesus says, don't worry about tomorrow. And in that, we, again, wrestle with, well, do I worry about tomorrow or do I not worry about tomorrow? Do I plan for tomorrow or do I not? Does saving money honor God? Well, I would suggest, even in light of those particular scenarios that we talked about, that saving money does, in fact, honor God. I'll try to make that case for you this morning. I want to look at a scripture verse in Genesis chapter 41. This is a story, the kind of the tail end of a part of the story of Joseph. Joseph is one of the most honorable men in all of the Bible. If you've never read through the story of Joseph's life, you ought to. And he had a rough start to things. I don't know how many of you think your families are bad, but he was sold into slavery by his brothers. Right? So next time you're around Thanksgiving table, looking at the people around there thinking how much of a disaster your family is, right? And how politically correct or incorrect they may be, or how out to lunch they may be, at least they never sold you into slavery. Right, so Joseph gets sold into slavery. He ultimately, through a series of events, ends up in this guy's house as the manager, the custodian of all of his estate. The estate of this very wealthy, very influential, very powerful man. And then that man's wife tries to seduce Joseph, and he resists her seduction, and as a reward is accused of rape or attempted rape, and is thrown into jail where he languishes in prison for years. But then eventually, again, through a series of God-ordained events, he is one day standing before Pharaoh, the most powerful man in all the world, because Pharaoh had a dream. And the dream was keeping him up. And his wise men and his counselors were unable to interpret the meaning of the dream. But Joseph, because God had given him the interpretation, was able to tell him what the dream meant. The dream meant that the nation of Egypt was going to undergo a period of 7 years where they were going to have more than they could ever use. And Joseph said, during this time, we need to be careful in how we plan for the future because there's bad years that are going to immediately follow. And so this is where we pick up. Joseph, instructing Pharaoh on his recommendation, says this, excuse me, "Therefore, Pharaoh should find an intelligent and wise man and put him in charge of the entire land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh should appoint supervisors over the land and let them collect 1/5 of all the crops during the 7 good years. Have them gather all the food produced in the good years that are just ahead and bring it to Pharaoh's storehouses. Store it away and guard it so there will be food in the cities. That way, there will be enough to eat when the 7 years of famine come to the land of Egypt. Otherwise, famine will destroy the land." Joseph knew, because God had given him the interpretation of this dream, that there was coming a day where Egypt was going to undergo tremendous famine. In fact, not just Egypt, but all of the known world. And they had to properly plan for that. And the plan was quite simply to save. That was the plan. To save, to take out of the abundance of what they had produced and save back a portion of that for a rainy day. Now, a few things I want to draw out of this story as we consider what it means for us to be custodians or stewards of what God has given to us. First of all, is that everything belongs to God. If we're going to understand stewardship and the principles of stewardship and the principles of what it means to be accountable to God for all that He has put within our control, we have to recognize that everything belongs to God. Again, this dream did not come about through some natural means. It was God that gave Pharaoh the dream. And it was God who gave Joseph the interpretation and the wisdom and the counsel for how to best deal with and prepare for the difficult days that were coming. And it reminds us in some small way that everything belongs to God. There is no difference between your stuff and my stuff and the stuff that belongs to the guy living down the road from you. The only difference that exists is whether or not you and I recognize that our stuff is not our stuff. The entire earth is the Lord's, the Bible says. Everything belongs to God. You might feel like you have your name on it, right? Because your name shows up on the registration or the title or the billing statement, right? And you say, this is mine. And we all have that perspective when it comes to our things, but everything, whether you recognize it or not, it belongs to God. I know that because when you die, you don't get to take it with you. Even then, you maybe have some jurisdiction over what happens to that stuff, but really, at that point, your influence is done. Everything belongs to God. Secondly, managing this everything is the collective calling of every person. Managing the everything of this world that belongs to God is the collective calling of every person. You ever struggle to wonder what is your purpose for being? Like why you're here? What is the purpose for your life? Now, we all are living out individually our understanding of our purpose, right? That might manifest itself in the roles that we play in this world as a husband or a wife or as a parent. As an employee at some particular place, right? You may have some particular profession, and in that profession, you experience what it means to live out your purpose. Maybe you volunteer in some capacity here at this church or at some other place, and in that, you're living out what it means to live with purpose. But did you know that collectively, it is the purpose of every single one of us to manage everything that God has put within our reach. In fact, God created the world, and then He created us, and He said, I want you, my human beings, to manage this wonderful thing called the world. I want you to manage everything that I put within your touch. Everything belongs to God, and now it's my responsibility, it's your responsibility to take care of it. And how do you take care of other people's things? Hopefully very well, right? You ever been in charge of somebody else's kids? It's amazing what you'll let your kids do, what you'll let your kids to jump on, and what you'll let your kids try compared to like somebody puts their kids under your control and you're, like last thing you want to do is return those children damaged, right, or worse. And so you're really, really responsible with how you watch over and guard those kids. I mean, your kids, let them play in the streets. They'll be fine. Somebody else's kids, it's a different story. Anybody own a lake house here? You know what you want to do with that lake house? You want to let the Parison family use it. You do. Because the Parison family takes really, really good care of other people's things, especially Mrs. Parison. She will have that thing cleaner than you have ever seen it before. So I'm just letting you know. That's how we handle other people's things, right? We have a tendency, hopefully, to have this high level of regard for those things. And if we saw our stuff as belonging to God, hopefully that changes our perspective for how we handle it. You see, we earn our income, we make our money, right? And we feel like that money is ours to do with as we please. And so we piddle it away sometimes. We spend it frivolously, right? I've had this iPhone for 6 whole months in a row. And now the next one's out, right? And everybody's got it. So I got to go get it, right? And I have the money to do it, and so I do it, right? That's the perspective that, like, my money is my money, that my stuff is my stuff, rather than I am a steward, I am a custodian of what God has put me in control of, and I'm actually managing it for him. Now, if my iPhone and the money that I use to purchase that iPhone and the money that I might potentially use to purchase the next iPhone, if I see all of those things as God's, would I say, well, God needs himself a new iPhone? You see what I mean? Like, there's just a different way that we have this perspective regarding our things when we see that our stuff belongs to God. And so when I see that managing the everything that is God's is my calling, it is my purpose, hopefully it raises the level of responsibility I see with how I manage those things. And with that, in regards to generosity, we can find that saving money is actually, or could become, a strategy for generosity. Saving money can become a strategy for generosity. The instruction, the plan was, let's save back 20% of what we harvest. Now, it's hard for us to really relate because we go into the grocery store, right, where there's aisles and aisles of stuff. I mean, we don't worry about food. We just walk into the store and we buy whatever we want, right? Our stomachs aren't grumbling, at least not for long, before we can satisfy them. But back when Joseph lived, I mean, food was scarce. It was hard to come by. They didn't just sit around eating as much as they want. I mean, that was reserved for the 1%. We talk about the 1% all the time. I mean, the 1% back then, they got to eat whenever they wanted. The rest of the people, they ate when they could. And so what they could have done during those times of plenty, during those times of wealth and richness, what they could have done is they could have certainly lived on and consumed everything that they harvested. They could have said, man, it's been another great year. Let's eat to our full. We've never gotten to eat like this. We've never gotten to experience what it's like to have so much. And they could have consumed and consumed and consumed and lived within the confines of what these wonderful, bountiful harvests were producing. But Joseph said, no, we can't do that. We have to continue to live in the 80%. Let's hold back 20% so that we'll have enough for when the lean times come. You see, if you don't take care of yourself, if you don't take care of your needs, you are never going to find yourself in a position where you can be generous and where you can be giving. Giving will always feel impossible. Now, don't raise your hand, but I just wonder if you're sitting here today wishing that you could give more, wishing that you could be more generous. I'm not talking about just here in the context of the church, but just overall in your life. You wish you could practice a higher degree of generosity in your life, but it is just impossible, right? Because all the money that you have coming in is being used immediately to take care of all the immediate needs that you have. There's nothing left. There's nothing more. Like, how can I give? How can I be generous? I mean, I'm barely taking care of myself. And so I'm trying to encourage you this morning to look to your own interests in this regard, to figure out a way to scrimp and to save and to put away and to save, to preserve for the future. Because in doing that, you'll be able to overcome the obstacle where giving feels impossible. In this case, a penny saved is a penny stowed for future use, perhaps, or perhaps even for future giving. Listen, you're going to need money down the road, right? You're going to need money down the road. That is just a rule for all of us to follow. We are going to need money down the road. And mathematics tells us that if we don't start saving little by little early on, like we ought to, then we will be rushing through toward the end, trying to save for what is undoubtedly coming. And in doing that, math tells us that we'll have to save way more at that time than we would have if we just started early. If we had just given ourselves the benefit of time to let our money grow little by little by little. Listen, you young people out there, I just want to encourage you, start a savings plan. Start it now. If you're not doing it, start it now. It is one of the best things you can do for yourself financially. I know you want to spend your money. I know you want to use it. I know you're glad you're getting a paycheck, but save, scrimp, preserve, put away some, because the little by little that you start to do now is going to pay amazing dividends down the road. For those of you that are my age or older, maybe you find yourself in a position where it's going to take even more sacrifice because we started so late. Well, do it. There's no time better than right now to start saving for the future, because saving will ultimately provide us the road that we need to practice generosity. In order to save, we're going to have to learn what it means to live not within our means like we are often instructed to do, but we actually have to live below our means. Many of us here today, we're living above our means, right? If you're chasing expenses with credit cards, right, racking up debt, kind of going backwards financially, you are living above your means. That is, you're bringing in a certain amount of money, but you're spending more than that amount. And so now you're becoming a debtor to some institution. And as a debtor, you are a slave to that institution until you pay that debt back. So we know it's unhealthy to live above our means. And for many of us, the goal is, well, I just wish I could get to where I'm living within my means. That's not good enough. It's not going to get you to a place where you're going to be healthy financially. We actually have to learn to live below our means. You know what living below your means looks like? This is what it looks like. It's the best way I can illustrate it. What it looks like is, I can buy that, but I choose not to. That make sense? It's looking at the money that you have, like, I don't need the credit card to go and buy. I actually have the money for that. I could go out and get it, but I choose not to. That's what living below your means means. It is a discipline. It's not buying the things I can buy. It's putting off the impulse to have something that my eyes see and my heart wants, because there's a better decision I can make with the money than just simply spending it on this thing. So saving requires living below your means. And I would add to that, if you're unable to save, if you're finding it difficult to save, I just want to suggest one thing you might look at is maybe you're not working hard enough. Maybe you're not working hard enough. Maybe you're not trying hard enough. A lot of people talk about how they can't save. And it may be the case, not for everybody, but it may be the case. And so I would just encourage you to look very introspectively at this possibility. Well, maybe you're not working hard enough. We were created to work. We were created to work before sin entered the world. Did you know that? Like, it's literally the thing that God asked of his humans to do. Even before that first act of disobedience and rebellion to God, God required of those he created to tend to the earth that he had put us in. He said, be fruitful and multiply. And oversee, that is, be a custodian of this earth that I have placed you in. Now, the fall happened. The requirement for work didn't change. It just got more difficult. And so now hard work feels more laborious than it otherwise would have if we were living in paradise. But we are made to work. We're supposed to work. We're supposed to work hard. Our work glorifies God. How many of you are going to get up for work tomorrow morning and you're just going to like trudge yourself off to work again? Huh? Come on, be honest. How many of you are going to do that? I know there's a few of you. You just hate going to that stupid old lame job that you always have to go to, right? Man, you just wish one of those scratchies one of these days would get you some money so you could not have to go to work anymore. You get the numbers right. That's no solution. Like, you need to change your attitude about your work. You need to change your attitude about your work. Your work is an opportunity for you to glorify and honor God. In exactly the same way, when you stood up and you sang this morning songs of worship and praise and adoration to God. In the same way, when you alone are reading through God's word and letting it change your heart and life, and when you are speaking to him in prayer and making your needs known to him, when you are giving in a service like this or directly to another person, just practicing generosity, like, we honor and glorify God in all those things. Well, we honor and glorify God in exactly the same way in our work. Or we don't. And so maybe we just need to be challenged to work harder. Proverbs 31, many of you are familiar with this. It gives us this beautiful picture of the industrious woman, right? The woman who, her husband is blessed beyond measure because of her industry, because of her virtue, right? And the question is put out there. It's like, who can find such a woman as this? And then it just begins to describe this amazing, wonderful woman. Some of the verses speak like this. It says, she rises while it is yet night and provides food for her household and portions for her maidens. She gets that? She rises while it is yet night, before the sun has even crept up out of the bottom of the earth. She is already up, getting ready for the day's events, providing food for her household. She considers a field and buys it. She uses her intellect and her industry to go and invest on behalf of her family with the fruit of her hands. She plants a vineyard. She perceives that her merchandise is profitable and her lamp does not go out at night. My wife loves to remind me of the old adage, a man's work is sun to sun, but a woman's work is never done, right? She's right. It's true. She perceives that her merchandise is profitable. Her lamp does not go out at night. She looks well to the ways of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. I imagine as I read through this that she probably has the opportunity to sit back and relax because she's made her way for herself. She's made her way for her family. She has adequately provided for them. She's done the work. And now it's time to just kick back and enjoy the work and the fruit and the labor of her hands. But here it says she does not eat the bread of idleness. She continues on. That is a wise, that is a noble, that is a virtuous woman. That is a wise, that is a noble, that is a virtuous man who will see his work as something, as an opportunity to glorify God. Now, if I've convinced you that it is important for us in our lives to save for ourselves and to see that what we're managing for God. We are mere custodians or stewards of what God already owns. There are a few things I want to caution you against. The first thing in your saving, right? Because I know you're going to go out of here like gangbusters. Right? Some of you already, you've been using your phone while I've been talking, right? And you've created a brand new savings account. Right? You've already transferred some money over. And you're like, all right, I'm going to put in $25 every single week into the savings account, right? Some of you are just going to go out there and you're going to start saving. I want to caution you against a few potential perils when it comes to saving our money, because we can fall in love with our savings. The first one is greed. Oh, be careful of greed. Be careful of greed. We have to be careful when we are saving our money that we don't grow greedy in ourselves and get to this point where we are now hoarding. Now, where's that line? What's that number? I can't tell you. I can't tell you. That's the tension that we talked about early on. That's the balance that we have to figure out how to maintain. Like, what do I keep for myself and what do I use for the benefit of others? But remember the story of Jesus regarding the man with the barns, right? The man who tore down his barns to build bigger barns. The key in that story, the kicker, comes kind of at the end that we often forget. What Jesus said of the man was not that he was rich and therefore displeased God in his wealth. What Jesus said was he was not rich toward God. He fell in love with his riches, and his greed consumed him, and Jesus called him a fool. Because in just a moment, as his life went out of his lungs, immediately all that stuff meant nothing. So watch out for greed. Secondly, watch out for negligence. Watch out for negligence. We all are guilty of negligence to some degree when it comes to managing God's stuff. Money that we've wasted, things that we haven't taken care of and therefore had to replace because we didn't manage them properly. Right? This we all, I imagine, deal with. I certainly do. It's like, I'm not going to take care of that. And then when it breaks, it's like, that stinks, but I got the money, I can fix it. Like, I should have done a better job taking care of it in the first place. If I saw my stuff as God's stuff, maybe I wouldn't be so negligent. Jesus told the story of the person with the talents, right? The people with the talents, and to each were given certain levels of talents. In another story, he talks about different levels of money, and a couple of them went out and they increased what their boss had given to them, but one, he just buried it in the ground and preserved just that thing. He was negligent in what had been entrusted to him, and because of that, it was taken away. And he was removed from his stewardship. The plans of the diligent lead surely to abundance, but everyone who is hasty comes only to poverty. Diligence is required in the way in which we manage what God has put us in charge of. Thirdly, watch out for idolatry. Watch out for idolatry. Again, the story of the rich young ruler, the unfortunate part of that whole thing was that, again, not that he was rich. It wasn't inherently wrong or evil or wicked that he had become rich, however he became rich. The problem was that his riches came before God. The love for his stuff superseded his love for Jesus. Jesus said, sell everything you have, give the money to the poor, come and follow me. Because Jesus recognized that that was the one thing that was standing in the way of him actually having a full-fledged relationship with God, one where he abandoned everything from this world and surrendered himself to God. And so we have to watch out that our savings doesn't become an idol to us, something that we fall more in love with than our love for God. Next, be on the guard for robbery. Be on the guard for robbery. Malachi chapter 3, God accuses his people of stealing from him. He says, should people cheat God? Yet you have cheated me. But you ask, what do you mean? When did we ever cheat you? And God replies to them, you have cheated me of the tithes and the offerings due to me. We rob from God when we misallocate what he has entrusted to us. Again, we are stewards with the responsibility of properly allocating what God has given to us. And when we don't do that, it is in essence robbing from God. In much the same way that if in the world, like let's say at your job, you were given responsibility over, some money, particular segment of the business, and if you just allocate resources improperly, well, then you're doing your boss, your supervisors, the owners, whoever, you're doing them a disservice, and you're in essence cheating and robbing from them. Next, we have to be on the guard against gambling. And by this, I mean the idea that we're going to try and accumulate riches quickly. Who wants to get rich quick? Anybody? Go ahead, you can put your hand up. Yes, I do. I do, if given the opportunity, I do prefer to get rich quickly. Our family, we oftentimes watch Shark Tank, and we just sit there like, why didn't I think of that? Right? Every time they get some big mega $1 million deal or something. It's like, I could have thought of that. Be careful in thinking that you will get there quickly. Watch out for the schemes that the world puts in front of us. Listen, if you are trolling Facebook and there's some commercial on there that talks about how you can make thousands and thousands of dollars every month from the comfort of your own home, I want to encourage you to just keep on scrolling. Because if it were true, everybody would be doing it, right? Those things don't work. Money gained hastily dwindles, but money gained a little at a time increases. Proverbs also says in chapter 28, verse 19, whoever works his land will have plenty of bread, but he who follows worthless pursuits will have plenty of poverty. So look at what you're pursuing. Do you want more bread, like plenty of bread, or do you want plenty of poverty? Two more. Number one, not working when we can work. Not working when we can work. So what is our retirement age? What is the retirement age supposed to be? What is the goal supposed to be? I just want to encourage you, wherever you are in life, whether you're a young person who's made plans for retiring as a multimillionaire at 42 years old, like that's your goal, okay, more power to you. That's great. That's wonderful. But let me just encourage you, if you get to 42 and you've made your millions, and the idea is that you are now going to just kick back and relax and enjoy the rest of the ride on home, that is not a life that honors God. I will unabashedly tell you that is not a life that honors God. If you can work, you should work. That doesn't mean you have to work for a paycheck. That doesn't mean you have to work for a paycheck. But every single one of us should continue to make contributions to the world in which we live. We must continue to make ourselves useful as custodians of what God has put us in charge of. And then the last thing I want to caution you against is the desire for autonomy. And man, boy, is this a thing that we fight, especially in our westernized culture. We all want autonomy, right? The American dream is to get to the place where we are financially independent. Oh, financial independence. Can you imagine? You know, that guy that you're going to see tomorrow? You can hand him your letter of resignation. You can say, see you later, I'm all done. I don't have to do this anymore, right? We all want to get to that place where we are financially independent, where we have autonomy, where we get to call the shots, and we get to do whatever we want with the rest of our lives. That's the American dream. And listen, that's fine to have the goal to get there. I mean, I'd like to be there. I'd like to not have to worry about actually earning a paycheck. I'd like to get to the place where I get to call my own shots. But if I get to the place where I start to see my money as my own and lose my dependence on God, I've missed it. I close with 1 Timothy, a letter that Paul wrote to a young pastor who was responsible for many, many people. And he said this, as for the rich in this present age, you know, those who in this life actually have riches, charge them, encourage them, implore them not to be haughty. Don't live with pride and arrogance, boastful of what you have done and what you have accomplished for yourself. Encourage them not to set their hopes on the uncertainty of riches. You catch that? Paul actually says, listen, even those riches that we think provide us with a level of certainty and comfort and protection against all of the potential problems that might come our way, Paul says those riches are uncertain. But instead, put your hope on God, who richly provides us with everything to enjoy. They are to do good, to be rich in good works, to be generous and ready to share, thus storing up treasure for themselves as a good foundation for the future, so that they may take hold of that which is truly life. You want to really live for God? You want to live in a way that honors God with all your life? I want to encourage you, first of all, you got to sign everything over to God. You got to take that title slip. You got to sign your name, sign it over to God. Say, this car, it's not mine, it's God's. The home that I live in, it's not mine, it's God's. The stuff that I have, it's not mine, it's God. That paycheck that comes in with my name on it and maybe a portion of my Social Security number, it's not mine, it's God's. And start stewarding, start managing God's money as if it were God's money. Sign over the titles of everything that you have to God and start a saving plan as if the money weren't your own. Actually start to look at it differently with a different perspective and say, you know, this money is not my own, this belongs to God. And as a responsible steward of what belongs to God, I'm going to start a savings plan. I'm going to plan for the future. I'm going to plan so that I can be generous not only now, but generous in the years to come.